Also, kind of checking in on that, this is incorrect. It's not Iowa soil temperatures, but it's regional. Kind of this area that is in blue. Well, okay, you can see Missouri, Kansas, and the plains out here. Then Iowa and the upper Midwest is in blue, which is under snow. But then each of these diamonds shows you what the frost depth. One of the concerns we had this year was what was going to be happening in the way of frost depths, because very dry soils can freeze very deeply very quickly if we get cold temperatures. But with the lack of cold temperatures we've had, we really haven't seen much in the way of very deep frost depths. The yellowish, the brownish to yellowish are within frost depths only up to a foot, so we haven't gone very deep. Places in North Dakota, we've gone 12 to 18, and there's a place over here on the UP where we were below 2 feet, but that's really not that significant for up in these places, and really no frost depths to speak of. So we've probably are not going to be dealing with much of an issue related to that this year, even if we would turn cold, which I'm not expecting too much of that just yet here. And then where we are specifically in Iowa in the way of frost depths, about the northern half of the state or northern third of the state is at freezing or below right now. Most of the rest of the state at 4 inches is above freezing, with again these warm temperatures, especially warm overnight temperatures. We've kept the soil from freezing very deep as we've gone along throughout the winter here. Regionally, most of the frozen area is up in the Dakotas, parts of Minnesota, a few spots here and there other places. On the left-hand side, this is one frustration I have working with our regional partners, is we can't get our regional partners to agree on sharing data well enough where we can get a good soil map. We've got a map in the upper left-hand side here with a contoured map, showing North Dakota is right at freezing or just below there, and warmer temperatures to the south. And then lower right-hand side, the white areas are ones that are freezing. Anything that's marked in black, the locations that are marked in black are not freezing. And you get some differences there based on whether they're on sod or whether they're bare soil in this situation. But again, not too much in the way of frost depth as we're going along here. Okay, moving along with some meteorology or some climatology background on where we are right now. Mentioned about drought in this and where we are right now, and definitely this is gives you a view of what's gone on. This is the last 6 months. Looking back at the last 6 months, even if we looked further back last year, you'd see more of this. Total precipitation is in the upper left-hand side. How much actual rainfall we've had in the last 6 months. In the lower right-hand side, how that compares to normal in our region. And you can see the areas that are still quite dry. Indiana and Illinois, much of Iowa, and then out into the plains, and then parts of Wisconsin, where we're below half of average or even worse in many places. And again, that drops off some of the earlier part of the year where we were quite dry. We were very pleased. It was actually dry early last year, if you remember, because we had very wet soils coming in. And if you heard me talk last year, we voiced concern about delays in planting, and that didn't happen because precipitation was very limited last spring. It was good at the start, but then as time went along, the lack of precipitation, and then the combination with warmer temperatures and higher winds really removed water from the soils. And I apologize for the background of our dog here. I'm not sure if someone can take care of that or not. If we move up to the last 90 days and you see a similar pattern, dryness in the plains, dryness, some dry pockets in the eastern Midwest, part of Iowa into Wisconsin was actually above during the last 90 days. So that eastern part of Iowa, part of Wisconsin, the soil situation is much better there because we were able to get some rainfall and get some soil moisture recharge in that location. And then the last 30 days, just looking at temperatures, I mentioned about the warmth that has happened recently. If we extended that back, you'd see something similar. Dakotas, Minnesota, the contours there are, the oranges are 6 and then the reds are 9 to 12 to 15 degrees above average for a 30-day period. That's not a day or a set of days. That's a 30-day period where temperatures are that much above average. That's remarkable for this time of year up here. And then everywhere in the Midwest, everywhere is at least somewhat above average. The yellow areas are 0 to 3. That's nothing too significant this time of year, but it still is above average. So again, look at a different view of what's happening in the way of soil moisture here. And I guess I should say, if there are any questions you have along the way, um, raise your hand, interrupt me, get my attention, or you can put a question in the chat box, and we'll deal with these as we're going along here. I don't like droning on my own. I want to be able to deal with things you want to know about. Okay.
Dennis,
Yes.
I think since our group is small enough, they can just go ahead and unmute and, ask the question as you take a breath. So.
Yeah. I'll pause here. Does anyone have anything they want to check in on so far?
I guess one question I have is just we've got some producers that are kind of switching forages possibly from alfalfa to other things because we're not getting the snow cover most years. I mean, this year we got some snow cover, but a lot of years they don't get the snow cover, which kind of affects the alfalfa survivability. What's the prediction for snow coverage? Is it going to continue to be less and less?
Good question. That's a hard thing to say. What we are generally seeing with snow cover is it's an odd combination of things. If you look at, say, the last 15 years or so, where are you located? Are you in Iowa? Where are you located in Iowa?
Dubuque, Iowa.
Dubuque. Okay. If you look at the northern third to half of Iowa over the last, say, 15 years or so, we've actually seen more overall winter precipitation. But if you look at amount of snow cover on the ground, it's less. And that's because more of our precipitation is often coming as liquid, or even if it comes as snow, which if the people in central Iowa have seen this, this is our we've had 3 fairly decent snowfall events this year, but the first 2 melted. So that's what you're seeing is seeing snowfall that falls, but then it melts off. So exactly what you're talking about is getting snow cover that doesn't stick around. And that is associated with the overall our warming in the winter, which we are seeing fairly significant warming in the winter. So I would agree that I think it's a wise choice to, if you need to have snow cover to help protect some of the alfalfa, that might not be a bad thing to do, is to do more of that.
So I shouldn't buy a snowmobile then.
Oh,
you don't have to go there.
As a federal person, I can't, just kidding. So no, I mean, you're still going to get snowfalls and be able to take advantage of them. They just won't stick around as long as they used to. So good question. Other questions? Okay. Let's go ahead here and we'll pick up with soil moisture. Now, soil moisture is, you think, is a fairly straightforward thing to talk about, and it's really quite difficult because of soil type. We don't have good measurements in a wide range of soil types, and we try to model it, and then you're trying to model a bunch of different things. So it's really kind of hard, and we do have to hand wave a bit as to what we are in the way of soil moisture. But what we look for, and these are 2 different soil moisture products, and they're both based on, one is a NASA product and one is from NOAA. And they're both based on percentiles, basically from a 0 to 100th percentile based on some period of record. So that if you're in the white area or the gray area in the upper left-hand side, you're in the middle of the distribution, so somewhere close-ish to average. And then the darker red you are in both of these, the drier the soil is assessed to be in that location. So since you're like we do with a lot of computer models, they're not always right, but you're looking for, are you seeing the same thing between the computer models? So there are some differences up in the Dakotas about severity, but generally you can see western Iowa out into the plains, that area in the eastern Corn Belt, and a little bit in the Dakotas, and then obviously the southwestern U.S. are all quite dry comparatively. Again, what I talked about, lack of precipitation, warm temperatures, a lot of extraction of soil moisture last year that was not recharged by the precipitation in the fall. So western Iowa is, if for people focused on Iowa, western Iowa is the place where I have a huge amount of concern. For those of you, I don't know if they shared them around or not, but Joel DeYoung and Paul Paul Castle both still do gravimetric sampling. They go out and take soil moisture samples, and the locations where they did it in areas northwest Iowa range from 2 to maybe 4 inches of liquid in the 5-foot profile. At worst, to get that profile filled, you should be maybe 10 inches, maybe up to 12 inches to fill that profile. So we have a lot of soil moisture capacity up there, and that's part of what has me concerned going into this year right now. Related to that, then, the U.S. Drought Monitor. How many of you are familiar with the U.S. Drought Monitor? Let's start there. You give me a hand raise or a yeah in the chat or something like that. So this is the U.S. Drought Monitor has now been around about 20 years, a little over 20 years. Kind of evolved a little bit over time. It's become more refined, but the basis of it, again, is to give you a snapshot of drought over the country. And it's not only agricultural drought, it's all different kinds of drought impacts related to this. There's a number of different indicators. Soil moisture is one of those, precipitation at various time frames, how it looks, impacts are related to that. To that end, as we get going into the growing season, particularly, if there is an impact you or any of your constituents or stakeholders are experiencing, we'd like to hear about it, because Justin Glisson, the state climatologist, and I are part of a small group of people who are able to assess conditions in Iowa and send that information forward to the Drought Monitor author. There is an author each week, one person whose job is to redraw this map on a week-by-week basis. It's a really daunting task, but they incorporate a lot of this data and then local input, and we like to be able to look at what things conditions are, hear what's impacting, people are being impacted, and share that on a weekly basis. So we'd like to hear about that, and sometimes we'll even send out information to see what's going on with people. So the area in Iowa particularly that is worst, I mentioned about, was most of western Iowa, where the dryness was worst. The reddish in northwest Iowa is D3, extreme drought. A lot of the southwest is in much worse shape even than we are. And then some D1 in the eastern Midwest. I'm going to slide on one more slide here. Yeah, there we go. A little more zoomed in map. I give you a little more detail on where these are. These maps are not going to change very much throughout the winter because we don't expect a lot of precipitation during the winter, and we don't get a lot of precipitation during the winter comparatively. So, I mean, if we got a 3-inch rainfall, very unlikely, we would probably show some changes in the map, but we don't get that sort of thing. And we don't show worsening because we don't expect a lot of precipitation at this time of year. So some of you may have heard in media last week from a meeting that we did that I was calling for drought to continue into the spring. And that's basically because I don't expect us to get enough precipitation to see more than marginal improvement as we go along into the spring. Where are we by the end of the spring? I will expect to see some improvement by the end of the spring, simply because we get more precipitation in the spring, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. This gives you some more detail as to some of the places that are worst hit. And here's what I was talking about when we expect to see changes. This is again a climatological graphic. On the left-hand side is the scale for precipitation, and the green bars indicate average precipitation. This is for Ames. So other places in the state are going to look similar to this, slightly different, but similar. when we expect to get most of our precipitation. May to August, Ames runs, between 4 and 5 inches of precipitation on average during those months. A little less in April, quite a bit less in September. And then you see during the winter, really not much. We expect much in the way of precipitation. But there is this period of time, and then the lines are the average monthly high, the average monthly low in the blue, and then the monthly average that you see that kind of parabolic look. Warms up in the summertime, cools down in the wintertime. So there's this period of time in the spring where we get some additional precipitation before crops start growing very actively, plants start growing actively, and before we start evaporating much water. So that's the time when we would typically expect some improvement in our drought situation. And I would expect we'll probably get some of that pending how much rainfall we get. Okay. I think that's enough about that now. Okay. Now we're going to start talking about where we are and where we're expecting to go as we move along through this growing season. Some of you may have heard about La Nina. Elwin Taylor used to talk about El Nino and La Nina. Actually, that was part of my PhD, so he used some of the information from my PhD and when he talked about El Nino, La Nina situations. And I didn't include the map of where this occurs, but El Nino, La Nina, we're talking about seeing things that are happening with sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. Changes in sea surface temperatures there change what happens in the atmosphere, and what happens in the atmosphere then can kind of work its way over to us. It's not a direct relationship because to get from the Pacific, it has to go through a couple other steps. So it's not a direct relationship, but there are the hints of things that will happen or change based on whether we're in El Nino or La Nina. And right now we are in a La Nina advisory. That means we are in a La Nina and a moderately strong one, and we're going to expect to stay that way through the spring. This graphic shows the probabilities of being in those three phases that we talk about. The blue is the probability of being in La Nina, the red is probability of being in El Nino, and then gray is the probability of being neutral, which is in between the two phases. And we do this in 3-month periods: December, January, February, January, February, March, April, March, April, May. So the probability of being in La Nina stays above 50% into the spring, into March, April, May is the most likely one. And then we switch off to gray so that neutral is the more likely outcome. But then La Nina may slide back as we go later on in the year. Why is this important? Our ability to say much of anything at much, more than ahead a few weeks per se, let's say, is when we're in an El Nino or La Nina. Again, it doesn't give us everything we need to know, but it gives us some information to work with. This winter has been somewhat La Nina-like. In Iowa, we're kind of caught between places that tend to be drier to the south and wetter to the north and east during La Ninas, and then the wet and then the warmer or cooler areas. There is a tendency for the northern plains to be cooler during La Ninas and warmer to the south. So it's a hard call for what Iowa says in the wintertime. Our problem is that if we have a La Nina during the summertime, which right now this forecast does not call for that, but I'm not sure yet this is going to come to pass this way. If we have a La Nina during the summertime, it does increase our risk of being hotter and drier. We'll show you that here in just a little bit. El Nino tends to be better growing seasons. Very, very unlikely we go to an El Nino transition anytime soon. So that's kind of where we are right now. Does that make sense to people? I know this is kind of this is a bit more complicated and it gets talked about a lot. Does that make sense? Are there other questions you have about this? I've put everybody to sleep. I've been successful. Yes. Okay. All right. Where we're going to jump from here is to jump into some of the outlooks and what we can say about what's going to be happening, what we know at this point. Okay, this is a graphic of, again, from NOAA. Excuse me, get a drink of water here. Of expected precipitation over the next 7 days. This is drawn basically from the computer models to say how much precipitation are we expecting to get. The southern U.S. is likely to be much more active. Up around the Midwest, you can see, maybe a half inch of precipitation possible. There is a system coming through into Sunday that looks like it's going to be more focused, especially snow part to our north. Northern Iowa has a better chance of getting some of it. And then maybe a little bit of additional precipitation into the middle of next week with another system that works its way through. Again, not a big change, but a little bit of precipitation. Eastern Corn Belt has a little better chance of getting some of the moisture in their soil. Okay. Okay. Then the next ones we're going to show you are outlooks that are based on probabilities. And what these means is once we start getting further out, we can't say specifically what's going to happen. So we start talking about probabilities, higher chances of wetter or drier, warmer, colder, that sort of thing. I'll show you a graphic here in just a second. These incorporate various pieces of scientific information. They use computer models. Computer models are useful, can tell us some information. They can't tell us everything. So they have to be interpreted. Ocean effects like La Niña, and there are some other ocean effects that come into play. Those are included, and trends are also included. If you tend to be wetter in the springtime over 10 or 15 years, the likelihood of being wetter is increased just because of some kind of trend. And I'll show you a couple of those as we go along here too. Okay, here's the graphic I was showing you. If you want to look at this in more detail, basically the colors again are the darker greens have higher probabilities of being wetter. The darker browns have higher probability. The darker the brown, the higher probability of being drier. The darker the red, higher probability of being warmer. The darker the blue, the higher the probability of being cooler. So what I want to point out though is that while the grays are near normal, and then these lighter shades indicate maybe wetter or maybe warmer, the probabilities are not that much higher. So I'll point those out as we go along. That sometimes people show these maps and say it's going to be wet here. No, it's just a little higher chance of being wet in some of these cases. And that's an important interpretation in these maps. Okay. The first ones, and these are available for anyone to look at. They are updated daily. By about 2 in the afternoon, a little after 2 in the afternoon, and they are updated every day, even on weekends. There's human interaction with them during the week. On the weekends, it's completely automated. So on the left-hand side here, chances, we're looking at the 8 to 14 days, so the end of January, first part of February. A little bit better chance of being warmer than average out in the plains. We're near normal in our area. From a precipitation side, after we have this precipitation, this event come through, you see some slightly better chance of turning dry again as we get into the end of the month and into the early part of January, or early part of February, excuse me. And jumping ahead, we're kind of in an odd situation because there are 30-day outlooks. I'm not showing you the 30-day outlook because the last one was issued at the end of December for January, and we're almost 2/3 of the way, or almost 2/3 of the way through the month. So it doesn't make any sense to show you what the outlook was for January. And the new outlooks will be released tomorrow. So there'll be more information coming out about some of the changes to these tomorrow. So normally I'd show you a 30-day outlook, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to at this point. So the outlook tomorrow will say the next 30-day one for February, what's going to happen, likelihood in February. So I'll show you the 90-day outlook. This one kind of makes some more sense anyway. Again, temperature on the left-hand side, slightly better chances for warmer than average, southern Iowa to the south, slightly higher chances of cold to the north. Again, we're kind of in between those two. And precipitation on the right-hand side, this is what I was talking about as Iowa gets caught kind of in the middle between these. That the Eastern Corn Belt, Great Lakes have a better chance of precipitation, increased chance of precipitation, while the plains tend to have a better chance of being drier. This is very much what a La Niña looks like. So we're kind of caught in the middle. But if you look at that outlook, that lines up pretty nicely, good and bad, with what we saw across the state. The slightly better chance for precipitation, the eastern part of the state, where conditions are not too bad already. whereas close to the drier area is in the western part of the state, which is already dry, which is why my level of concern, and a couple people brought up earlier, drought and what's going to happen with the drought has me a bit concerned, because we are dry in the western part of the state already, and our outlooks lean closer to the dry than they do the wet in this situation. And that's what has me a bit concerned right now as we go along. Now, this is the 90-day outlook for um, January, February, March. So that doesn't give us too much of a concern, because we've still got some time to make up for that. One thing in our favor, I mentioned trend being part of our friend. This is a graphic that shows what trend is like. This is March, April, May, average precipitation for the state of Iowa. Each one of these green dots is a year from 1895 until the present. And then the red line is kind of a running average. The blue line is the overall trend. And this box kind of shows you, what has happened more in our springs recently. That we've tended towards wetter springs. Our drier springs really have not been that dry. If you look at the long-term average over this whole time frame, only 6 of the last 25 years have been below that, and even those 6 years really haven't been too bad. So that's something working in our favor this year. Is trend is our friend in this case, I guess, is a joke, that we have a better chance of getting some recovery. Will it be enough this spring? That's the question, but getting some recovery. In previous years where we've had these wet soils, the wetter springs have been a real issue for us. This year, the wetter spring would be beneficial for us in this situation. Now, if we jump ahead to the May through July period, again, these are going to be updated tomorrow. May, June, and July, warmer is the more likely case, and this is largely based on trend. Our summers are warming. If we get some time here, we can go back and talk about that a little bit about what's happening with the warming in the summertime. But then our trend is also slightly increased. We have better chances for precipitation. Again, these outlooks say La Nina is going to go away, and warmer and wetter is slightly increased chances for both of those. I'm not convinced that La Nina is going to go away from us, unfortunately, in this situation. And here's what would happen. I grabbed this from a NOAA website. That June through August, if you have a La Nina, on the left-hand side is temperature. These are in degrees C. So we're, not huge, but we might be half a degree warmer on average during La Nina conditions. But on the right-hand side, we have a little better chance of being drier during La Ninas during the summertime. So if La Nina does happen this summer, the outlooks would fall this way. So that's why we're keeping a close eye on what happens with La Nina right now. And again, dry soils with slightly increased chances for dry soils for the summer. That's what has me concerned right now. Short answer of this: am I concerned? A little. Am I hugely concerned? No, not at this point. So it's just something we got to keep an eye on and try to work our way through. Okay, let's give you some wrap up here. Just some take home messages. Currently dry, much of western Iowa. We will expect to see some improvement in the spring. Not quick improvement until the spring. If we do get some bigger rains in the spring, that would show quicker improvement in the U.S. Drought Monitor conditions. So we will get some recovery. We'll completely recovery. It's going to be tougher to do, I think. We'll keep an eye on that. And then that puts us at risk for drought problems for the year. The other part of the problem with the western part of the state being drier, climatologically, they tend to be warmer during the summertime and get less precipitation. So I think we're really going to be reliant on needing to get spring rainfall and more regular rainfalls throughout the year. We're not going to have that large soil moisture buffer to carry us through some of those dry periods. Eastern part of the state, I'm less concerned about at this point because the soils are not in too bad a shape. So, but there's still a lot to be determined. So don't react to this. Don't overreact to this. Don't let other people overreact to this. But definitely encourage them to start thinking through some things right now. And that's one of the things. Dry soils are starting the year. The positive early field access, I think, is a very good possibility this year, unless we get very wet or get a lot of snow that holds on, I think early field access is going to be a definite possibility on the advantage side this year. And maybe take advantage of a little earlier planning to take advantage of moisture when it's there. Um, some of the issues, things to think about, trying to encourage people to reduce tillage. If you've got dry soils, anytime you do a tillage, you're removing moisture from that soil. Lots of other reasons not to do tillage. This is another reason to do that. Maybe consider some plant populations. If you have really dry soils, maybe reduce some planting populations. Again, we're going to be very reliant on ongoing precipitation. And we're not in the same situation. Not everybody's in the same situation. Eastern part of the state, not too bad. West is where I'm more concerned about, and that especially goes out into the plains areas. Those dry areas in the Eastern Corn Belt, I expect to be eliminated by the time we get onto this here. So from an extension standpoint, I think it would be worthwhile to think ahead about, what kind of resources do we need to provide people? What kinds of things do we need to develop? And we would be happy to work with you. And I know Justin Glisson, the state climatologist at IDALS, would be happy to help support some of those efforts too. I hope at some point ISU will rehire an extension climate person, but we know the financial issues that are going on right now. So, okay, let's pause here. What questions do you have at this point, or comments or complaints?
Dennis, what's the effect or explanation? It seems like you touched on it a little, but go deeper on these big weather events that all of a sudden we have this 7-inch downpour that we didn't necessarily always see a few years ago.
Yeah, you're dead on. This is something that we are seeing with the changes in the climate system. We are with a warmer atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere is able to have more water vapor in it, and we're seeing this occurring more frequently. We have more larger water vapor amounts in the atmosphere, and then when you have that, you get the right conditions set up, and you can drop larger rainfall events. We also think sometimes that storm systems may not move along as quickly as they used to. So therefore, when you have a storm that's dropping heavy rainfall, instead of progressing at 30 miles per hour, it's now moving at 15 miles per hour or something like that. So therefore, it's able to drop more rainfall over an individual area for a longer period of time. It is a definite problem. It's also a problem because part of our changes in rainfall, we mentioned about spring rainfall. This year we want it. Other years we don't want it because the soils tend to be a little wetter at that time of year already. What's the other problem we see with spring rainfalls? Well, if you don't have a cover crop, or if you've not left residue, and if you've done tillage, what's going to happen to that soil? We're opening ourselves up to more potential soil and nutrient loss because of those changes in rainfall that are occurring, especially in the springtime. Less of a problem when you've got a crop canopy of some kind because you're breaking up that rainfall and it's not hitting the soil with as much energy. But that spring, when you've got nothing there, or even in the wintertime, Rick Cruz and I have had this conversation. You think, well, okay, a half inch of rainfall in the wintertime when your soils are frozen. Well, your rainfall on frozen soils, you produce runoff immediately, and it's able to thaw a very thin layer and move soil in a frozen soil standpoint. So all of these are really not very good from a soil standpoint, and that's why we encourage improved soil management, doing everything we can to manage our soil so we can limit our soil loss. So good question. Other questions?
We've got a question in the chat box from Linda. You touched on this a little, but for farmers and cattle owners in drought areas out west, what's the things to focus on this winter to plan for another dry year?
Okay, excellent idea. I don't know if ISU Extension has those resources. There are resources from the National Drought Mitigation Center who, especially for ranchers, to take into consideration, you know, what's your stocking rate, what's your feed situation, what's your water situation, and when you need to start thinking, you know, so for an example, for cattle, um, what's your feed situation? You know, do you have enough reserve feed? Because certainly pasture areas, hayland areas took a beating last year in the dry areas too, so they may be a little slower to recover this year. So we think about these feed situations. What's your water situation? Most times we don't think about a water situation here, but we could have problems where water could become limited. I know people were hauling water in some places last year because there was not water available. So start taking those into considerations. Do I need to reduce? Do I need to reduce cattle numbers? Do I need to do some early sell-offs to make sure that I can deal with that? From a farmer standpoint, obviously make sure your crop insurance is paid up. Um, be very careful with your soils. I mentioned not tilling because you want to try to maintain what you have there. Um, look at um, maybe look at your seeding rates. If your soils are very dry and it's not looking like it's improving quickly, maybe you drop your seeding rate a little bit. Maybe you drop your um, you know maybe you set your yield target down a little bit lower so you fertilize less. So we, especially with those input prices coming up now, people want to try to capture yield um, for prices. But if that could be a problem in your soils, maybe we set that yield target down so you save yourselves on input prices. And then look at marketing opportunities. Maybe don't forward market as much as you may want to with these prices. These are all tough calls, I understand, but I think it's better to start thinking about them now and doing some what ifs before getting in the middle of it and going, wait a minute, I don't know how to deal with this. So those are the things off the top of my head. Okay. Regarding soil and moisture retention, lost topsoil or decades, soil is generally able to retain as much moisture over the course of the year. Excellent question. I would say we have degraded Iowa soils, especially in some areas, to a certain extent. We have lost some of that organic matter, that topsoil that holds more moisture than some of the lower in the profile. Certainly, we have reduced that ability to hold soil moisture in some places. Generally, it's still pretty good, but that is, again, another reason we advocate for managing your soils and trying to rebuild that organic matter content or building the carbon content of your soil, because those are all related to your ability to hold soil moisture throughout the year. And along with what I mentioned earlier about the changes in more rainfall, we are seeing dry periods. Drought is still a factor that we're dealing with, and how we manage our soils can help our ability to limit limit our losses that can happen by holding that moisture in the soil over those dry periods. So will overgrazed pastures be able to hold moisture? That's an interesting question. Do we have a grassland expert in the house or somebody at Iowa State that we can turn that to? I don't have a good answer on that one.
Basically, if you have the overgrazed pasture, kind of what you have on top of the soil, you have on the bottom of the soil, so you're not going to have near the root mass. And so a lot of studies will show that like rotationally grazed pasture that are allowing that root mass to grow will undoubtedly retain a lot more water.
That would seem to make sense to me. Yep, I agree. Okay. Okay. There's two questions here about one about the solar cycle affecting our weather. There are a few studies out there that try to connect what's happening with cycles, solar cycles, to weather. Most of those are a little bit more fringy, I guess I will call them. Most of the things that we talk about are more directly related. The sun does have an impact on us, but it's not to the extent we think that it has larger changes in our climate. And I think that the same user also mentioned about the climate change issue, and I'll take just a minute here to go longer on that one. There is, the question came up, do we only have 12 years to change where we're going? that's not necessarily a hard and fast number. But our issue is that we have changed our climate greatly, um, mostly by greenhouse gases, some other things by changes we do at the surface, that are having larger effects around the globe, not only here, but around the globe. And we need to move towards a less greenhouse intensive energy production. Agriculture can be a part of this. We use greenhouse gases in agriculture, but we can be a part of some of the solutioning and sequestering carbon in the soils. Um, we need to be moving on this quickly because we are seeing the changes already, and we can't snap our fingers overnight and change things. They won't happen quickly. And our ability to do agriculture, as we see, is being impacted already. And by these changes in rainfall, changes in heat, these changes in rainfall are degrading our soils. That degrades our ability to do agriculture as effectively as we have before. There's a longer answer to that, but I don't want to dive into that too much more at this point. I think that handled. What other questions do you have? Well, if you want to chime in with other questions, let me give you a couple other quick things here. If you, I mentioned earlier about a weekly email. If you guys aren't getting that email, I can get you on that list that I share with the crops team. Or on monthly, we work with our partners at NOAA, state climatologists, and other folks in the region, where we do a webinar where we do something similar to this, but it's more focused on where we are right now, what are the issues, what are the things coming up. Tomorrow there will be one, it's on the third Thursday of the month. And why the third Thursday of the month? It's because that's when NOAA releases their longer range outlooks. So we do at 1 in the afternoon a webinar where we say, here's what NOAA is saying, here's the potential issues related to that. I'm almost always on there addressing ag questions. There's a colleague of mine from NOAA who's the host of it. And then we have a different presenter. I think I will be on for the April one, being the presenter. But you get to hear from a different presenter on a monthly basis. You do have to sign up. It's free. You get to ask questions like this, but you just have to sign up. And then let me go down here real quickly to, this is, I'll go back to that if you want to have a look at that. Here's our Midwest Climate Hub website, if you want to check out more about what we do, and then access to how to get in touch with me if you want to talk more about these situations. We're, if you want to follow me, if you do social media, I'm at Dennis Todey. The Climate Hubs are at USDA Climate Hubs. Then our website where you can get in touch with me. Okay, another question. With higher corn planting populations, don't actually need higher rainfall. Oh, don't we need higher rainfall above average? Yes, yes. And that's, I was mentioning maybe using lesser plant populations that you would, use somewhat less water from the soil. People aren't going to change plant populations huge amounts, but it might be a way of hedging some bets a little bit, is what I'm thinking. Do you have other thoughts or want to dive into that further?
If folks have some question, they expedite it, they can unmute themselves and go ahead and ask. I'll go ahead and make some housekeeping things. If you scroll up on the chat, you'll find the survey, and I just tested it. It is working. If you would please go ahead and click on that and answer a few questions. It's very short survey. It would sure help us out. And then if you scroll up, you'll see information from Kylie. She put Dr. Toddy's information up in the PDF form, and it also does work. So if you would like to get those slides set, he'll have that. Okay, any other final questions? Not hearing any. Thank you, Dr. Todey, for the presentation. A lot of really good information. Thanks you to the folks who attended. We had some really great questions come through. Again, it'll take a few days, but it will be in the archives at our ISU Dairy Team website. Look forward to having you back next year or next month at our next webinar. Thank you much.